My name is Cora Hale. For the last 10 years, my life has been a quiet one, spent within the hallowed, hushed halls of the Portland Central Library's historical archives. I am a keeper of stories, a preserver of delicate, forgotten things. I spend my days surrounded by the scent of old paper and leather, cataloging the lives of people long gone, piecing together their histories from faded letters, brittle photographs, and the ghosts of ink on a page. It is a peaceful existence, one I built for myself an hour's drive and a world away from the noise of my childhood in Willow Creek, a small town nestled in the Cascade foothills where the rain always seems to fall a little harder. My family is still there, rooted in the damp Oregon soil like the ancient Douglas firs that line the highway home. My father, Richard, a man of few words and a heavy, simmering presence. My mother, Helen, a woman who polishes the surface of things until they gleam, preferring not to acknowledge the dust that settles in the cracks. And my older brother, Liam, the golden son, the one who inherited my father's skill with wood and his quick, dismissive temper. For years, I believed the distance I'd put between us was a buffer, a quiet agreement that we were better off loving each other from afar. But some stories, I've learned, refuse to stay in the archives. They follow you, whispering in the quiet moments, until you have no choice but to turn and face them. This story, my story, truly begins on a damp Thanksgiving afternoon, the kind where the sky is the color of a whetstone and the air smells of pine needles and wood smoke. The annual pilgrimage to Willow Creek always filled me with a familiar blend of longing and trepidation. I longed for the sense of belonging that hummed just beneath the surface of our family's life, but I dreaded the silences, the unspoken resentments that hung in the air as thick as the gravy on the mashed potatoes. This year, the tension was palpable. The air in the house was tight, wound around a silence that even the drone of the football game on television couldn't fully penetrate. After a meal of polite, clipped sentences and the clinking of silverware, I escaped to the kitchen under the pretense of doing the dishes. The warm water was a comfort, the familiar scent of my mother's rosemary-scented soap a small anchor in the churning sea of my unease. Through the window above the sink, I could see the workshop, its windows dark. Miller and Son Woodworking. For 3 generations, that shop had been the heart of our family, the place where my grandfather, and then my father, had turned raw lumber into things of beauty and function. I had heard whispers on my last visit, murmurs about a developer, Horizon Properties, looking to buy the land the shop sat on for a new retail complex. It was prime real or something estate, right on the edge of town. I had assumed it was just talk. When Liam came into the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge, the air grew colder. He had my father's build, but my mother's restless energy, a combination that always set me on edge. I was thinking about the old workshop, I began, my voice softer than I intended. I kept my eyes on the soapy water, scrubbing a plate that was already clean. Clara mentioned something about a developer making an offer. A pretty significant one, she said. My younger sister, Clara, was the family's gentle mediator, always trying to smooth the ruffled feathers I inevitably caused. Liam's sigh was a familiar sound, laced with impatience. What about it, Cora? Well, I was curious what you and Dad decided. It's a big step for the family. He leaned against the counter, the bottle of beer cold in his hand. A small, smug smile I'd known since childhood played on his lips. It was the smile that always came before a jab. We decided to sell. The papers were signed last week. I turned off the faucet, the sudden silence of the kitchen amplifying the thrumming in my ears. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, my movements slow and deliberate. You sold it? Without telling me. Why would we? He scoffed. You haven't cared about that dusty old shop in years. You were too busy with your books and your quiet little life in the city to be bothered with family business. A familiar ache bloomed in my chest, a hollow feeling of being on the outside looking in. That's not fair, Liam. I was there when Dad had his heart scare last year. I helped Mom with the accounting when she couldn't make sense of it. The shop is part of my history too. My voice was even, a carefully constructed dam against the flood of hurt. I just think, for a decision that involves $250,000 and our grandfather's legacy, maybe all of the family should have been part of the conversation. That's when the fragile piece shattered. In one swift movement, he closed the distance between us. "You always have to make things difficult, don't you?" he snarled, his voice low and menacing. He shoved me hard. My back hit the edge of a heavy oak cabinet with a sickening thud that stole my breath. I stumbled, my vision blurring for a second. Before I could regain my footing, his hand shot out and he pushed my face, his palm connecting with my mouth. The impact was sharp and brutal. A flash of white-hot pain, the coppery taste of blood filling my mouth. I crumpled to the linoleum floor, the world tilting on its axis. The muted sounds of the football game drifted in from the living room, a surreal soundtrack to my disorientation. My lip was split and a throbbing ache was spreading through my cheekbone. Slowly, dazedly, I pulled myself up, my hand finding the wall for support. My first instinct, a primal need for help, was to get to the phone. I staggered toward the old rotary phone on the kitchen wall, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. Just as my hand brushed the cool plastic, it was ripped away. My mother stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. "Stop it, Cora," she hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. "It was just a stumble. Stop being so dramatic." I looked at her, my vision swimming. Through the haze of pain and shock, I saw not concern, not fear, but pure, unadulterated irritation. As if I had spilled wine on her clean floor. "He pushed me," I whispered, the words thick with blood. "You provoked him," she snapped back, her eyes like chips of ice. From the living room, my father's voice, a low rumble of dismissal, cut through the air. He hadn't even turned to look. There she goes again. Queen of the dramatics. I stood there, swaying, a drop of blood falling from my lip onto the collar of my white blouse. No one moved. Liam was already back at the fridge, grabbing another beer as if nothing had happened. The silence in the room was a living thing, a suffocating presence. On the floor, near the baseboard, something glinted. It was my grandmother's silver locket, the one I wore every day. The delicate chain had snapped. It lay in a small, dark smear of my own blood. That locket was the one thing of hers I owned. She had understood my quiet nature, my love for stories. She had seen me. Now, her locket lay broken on the floor of a home where I was utterly invisible. With shaking fingers, I bent down and picked it up. The clasp was shattered. Useless. I looked at my family, at their blank, unmoving faces, and a profound, chilling realization settled over me. They were not going to help me. They were not going to see my pain. To them, my pain was an inconvenience, a disruption to their carefully constructed peace. I straightened up, clutching the broken locket in my palm. Without another word, I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold, cleansing rain. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound of finality. I didn't look back. I just stood on the porch for a moment, the rain mingling with the tears on my cheeks, and whispered to the weeping gray sky, "They don't see me. But they will learn to hear me." The drive back to Portland was a blur of slick asphalt and the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers. Each rhythmic sweep was like a metronome counting out the beats of my own shattered heart. I held the broken locket in my hand the entire way, its cool metal a stark contrast to the burning in my lip and the throbbing ache in my soul. 2 days later, the bruise on my cheek had blossomed into a painful, plum-colored shadow. My reflection in the bathroom mirror of my small apartment was a stranger's, her eyes swollen, her lip still tender and split. I worked at the library archives, a place of quiet reverence, but that morning, the silence felt different. It felt heavy, accusatory. I kept my head down, the collar of my coat pulled high, trying to become as invisible as my family had made me feel. I slipped into the staff break room, hoping to go unnoticed, but my colleague, Ben, was there, nursing a cup of tea. Ben was a kind, gentle soul with eyes that always seemed to see a little more than you intended. He took one look at my face, and his own filled with a quiet, immediate concern that was so foreign to me it almost made me flinch. He didn't ask, "What happened to you?" He simply said, his voice soft, "Cora, are you all right?" The directness of his care, the simple humanity in his question, was a dam breaker. I tried to mumble a lie about tripping on the stairs, but my voice caught in my throat. I couldn't speak past the lump of unshed tears. He just nodded, a deep understanding in his gaze. I made extra chamomile tea, he said, pushing a steaming mug toward me. Take a few minutes. The archives can wait. That small act of kindness, of being seen without judgment, felt like a lifeline. I spent my break tucked away in a quiet corral, the warmth of the mug seeping into my cold hands. I finally pulled out my phone. It was a barren landscape. No missed calls. No messages from my parents or Liam. But there was one text from my sister, Clara. It had been sent the day after Thanksgiving. Cora, please just let it go. You know how Liam gets when he's stressed. Don't make waves. Don't make waves. The words felt colder and sharper than any physical blow. My own sister, the one I'd confided in, the one I'd protected from Liam's temper when we were children, was asking me to swallow my pain for the sake of a fragile, false peace. She saw the bruises not as an injury to me, but as a problem I was creating for everyone else. I leaned my head back against the cool wood of the corral, the scent of old books a strange comfort. A memory, dusty and long suppressed, surfaced. I was 9 years old. Liam was 13. I had accidentally broken the wing off a model airplane he'd spent weeks building. In a fit of rage, he locked me in the dark, musty pantry in the basement. I remember the smell of earth and damp concrete, the terror of the spiders I imagined crawling in the corners. I had banged and cried until my voice was hoarse. Hours later, when my mother finally opened the door, she hadn't hugged me. She'd looked at me, tear-streaked and terrified, and said, "Well, maybe now you'll learn to be more careful with other people's things." I was scolded for being careless. Liam was never punished for being cruel. I had learned my lesson well. My pain was my fault. My feelings were an overreaction. Back in the present, sitting in the quiet sanctuary of the archives, I realized I had been cataloging everyone's story but my own. I pulled a small, leather-bound journal from my bag, a gift from Ben for my birthday, and opened it to the first clean page. I began to write. Not in the detached, clinical language of an archivist, but in the language of my own heart. November 25th, incident in the kitchen. A split lip, a bruised cheek, a broken locket. A broken heart. I paused, my hand trembling slightly. Then, the words started to flow, a river of memories long dammed up. Age 9, locked in the pantry for breaking a model plane. Fault, my carelessness. Age 12, pushed down the back steps. Bruised tailbone. Fault, my clumsiness. Age 16, called overly emotional and hysterical for crying when Dad refused to even consider my application to an out-of-state art college. Fault, my dramatics. Age 25, learned from a cousin that Mom and Dad had given Liam a $50,000 loan to expand the workshop. I was never told. Fault, my distance. Current, assaulted in my childhood kitchen. Fault, my provocation. As I wrote, I saw it for the first time not as a series of isolated incidents, but as a pattern woven into the very fabric of my family. A pattern of dismissal, of blame, of silencing. If this were a historical record I was examining at work, a collection of letters detailing this kind of treatment, I would have flagged it. I would have named it for what it was. But because it was my family, it had always been filed away under normal. The broken silver locket sat on the table beside my journal. I picked it up, its familiar weight a sad comfort. And in the quiet hum of the archives, I made a silent vow. This story would not be lost. This history would not be erased. I would become the archivist of my own life. This cycle, this inheritance of silence, it would end with me. A week later, I drove back to Willow Creek. The late autumn light was soft and golden, casting long shadows across the fields. I told myself I was only going to drop off a book my mother had asked for, a simple errand. But in my heart, I knew I was testing the waters, searching for any sign of a crack in their wall of denial. The house was quiet when I let myself in. My father was at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, a fortress of paper and ink between him and the world. He grunted a greeting without looking up. Liam walked past me in the hallway, his shoulder brushing mine, the scent of sawdust and resentment trailing in his wake. He glanced at my face, the bruise now a sickly yellow-green, and his expression was utterly blank. My mother came in from the garden, her hands covered in dirt. "Oh, there you are," she said, her voice bright and brittle. She glanced at my cheek. "Looks like that's finally fading. You're lucky you don't scar easily." There was no malice in her tone, just a breathtakingly casual cruelty. I didn't respond. I told her I needed to get an old box of my childhood drawings from the attic. "Whatever for?" she asked, already turning her attention to washing a bundle of carrots at the sink. She waved me off, uninterested in why her grown daughter might be seeking solace in the relics of her past. The attic was just as I remembered it, a repository of forgotten things, smelling of cedar and thyme. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the bare bulb. In the corner, behind a stack of my mother's old-fashioned magazines, was the cedar chest my grandfather had made. I ran my hand over its smooth, cool surface before lifting the heavy lid. Inside were the family photo albums, their leather covers embossed with gold lettering. The Miller family, 1990 to 2000. I pulled one out. Page after page was a shrine to Liam. Liam's first steps. Liam on his first bicycle. Liam holding his high school basketball trophy. I was a ghost in my own family history, a background player in a few group shots, often slightly out of focus. Then I found it. A smaller, plainer album tucked at the bottom of the chest. My album. I opened it. The first few pages were filled with my baby pictures, but as I turned the pages, I saw them, empty squares of black paper, the little photo corners still glued in place, holding nothing but shadows. Photos had been carefully, deliberately removed. My school pictures, my birthday parties, my dance recitals, all gone. Only one remained. A small, square photograph from my 8th birthday. I was sitting at the head of the table, a proud, gap-toothed smile on my face, in front of a strawberry cake with pink frosting. I remembered that cake. I had begged for it. And then I remembered what had happened right after that photo was taken. I had gotten a beautiful music box as a gift. Liam had wanted to see it, and I, protective of my new treasure, had said no. He'd snatched it from my hands, and when I'd tried to get it back, he'd pushed me. I'd fallen, and the music box had shattered on the hearth. I had burst into tears, not just for the broken gift, but for the casual cruelty of it. My father had sighed and left the room. My mother had knelt beside me, but not to comfort me. She had taken me by the shoulders and said, in a low, firm whisper, "Stop it. You're ruining your own party. You are just too sensitive, Cora." Looking at that single, surviving photograph, a profound sadness washed over me. They hadn't just silenced my pain, they had tried to erase the very evidence of my joy, because my joy was too closely tied to the pain that always seemed to follow. They had curated our family history, editing out the parts that didn't fit their narrative of a happy, perfect family. I closed the album, my movements slow and heavy. I didn't take the drawings I'd come for. I took the album. I carried it out of that house like a sacred text, a piece of evidence I didn't yet know how to use. Back in my apartment, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gray. I laid the album on my large oak work table, the one I used for sorting delicate documents. I went to my closet and pulled down a box filled with the detritus of a quietly painful life, the doctor's summary from when I was 12, noting a fall that resulted in a sprained wrist, the cruel note from Liam I'd found slipped under my door in high school, the broken silver locket. One by one, I laid them out on the table. Not on a wall for the world to see, but in a quiet, ordered line for myself. The photograph from my 8th birthday sat at the center. I took a deep breath and, on a clean white index card, I wrote a title for my collection, An Archive of the Unseen. It was no longer just about my pain. It was about the truth. And the truth, I was beginning to understand, had a weight and a voice all its own. My phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. It was my mother. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice smooth as honey. "I was thinking, why don't you come for breakfast on Sunday? Liam and his fiancée, Nicole, will be here. I think it's time we all just moved on." Moved on. The words hung in the air. To move on from something, you first have to acknowledge it happened. My heart, a foolish, hopeful thing, whispered, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the apology. Against my better judgment, I heard myself say, "Okay, Mom. I'll be there." That Sunday, I walked into my parents' house with a bouquet of white tulips, a peace offering I wasn't sure they deserved. The house smelled of bacon and fresh coffee. My mother was at the stove, her posture perfect, her smile bright. "You look much better, dear," she said, a quick, assessing glance at my face. "See? A little time is all it takes." I followed her into the dining room, where the table was set with her best china. "Mom," I started, my voice quiet but firm. I was in the attic. I found my old photo album. She paused in the act of straightening a fork. Her shoulders tensed. My pictures, they were gone. She didn't look at me. She busied herself with the placement of a napkin. "You were always such a serious child, Cora. Always so heavy. Crying at birthdays, sulking at Christmas. It was hard to find a picture where you looked happy." The casual lie of it, the rewriting of history to her lips, stole the air from my lungs. "You tore them out?" I whispered, the question a fragile thing. She finally turned to me, her face a mask of weary exasperation. "Honestly, Cora, not everything is a malicious act. You have to learn to let things go." And with that, she brushed past me, leaving me alone in a room full of beautiful, empty things. Breakfast was a masterclass in denial. Liam's fiancée, Nicole, a cheerful, bubbly woman, chatted about their wedding plans. My father read the sports section. My mother passed the jam. The conversation flowed around me as if I were a stone in a stream. Then it happened. Liam reached across the table for the pot of coffee, his movements large and careless. His elbow caught the handle, and the pot tipped. A wave of scalding hot coffee cascaded directly onto my lap, soaking through my jeans. A sharp, searing pain shot through my thighs. I gasped, pushing back from the table, my chair screeching against the wood floor. Everyone froze. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, my mother sighed, a sound of profound annoyance. "Well, Cora, that's what happens when you sit so close to the edge of the table." No one moved to help. Liam let out a short, humorless laugh. "Guess you're just having a clumsy day, huh?" I stumbled to the kitchen, my legs shaking, the pain a white-hot fire. I ran cold water over a dish towel and pressed it to my burning skin, the cotton hissing softly. I leaned against the counter, biting my lip to keep from crying out, not just from the physical pain, but from the chilling, absolute confirmation of their indifference. I was not a person to them. I was a problem. A prop in their play that kept falling over. When I returned to the dining room, they were talking again, the incident already forgotten, absorbed into the thick tapestry of their denial. I stood behind my chair for a long moment, watching them. And then, without a word, I turned and walked out of the house for the last time. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, the pain in my legs a dull, constant throb. But it was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. This was not a family I could heal. This was a wound I had to learn to live with. I opened my journal and made 2 lists. Those who were silent. Those who helped hurt. The names flowed from my pen. Then I stopped. One name came to me, a whisper from the past. Someone who hadn't been silent. Not quite. I circled it. Mrs. Albright. My high school art teacher. A woman who had once seen a bruise on my arm and had held my gaze for just a moment too long, her eyes full of a question she never asked, and I never answered. My hand hovered over my phone. I found the number for the high school, asked for the staff directory, and left a message. An hour later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Hello." "Hi," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is Cora Hale. I'm looking for a Mrs. Albright. I think it's time to talk." That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. My mind was a restless sea, tossing me back and forth between the searing memory of the spilled coffee and my father's quiet dismissal. The dull ache in my thighs was a constant, physical reminder of the emotional burns I'd been nursing for a lifetime. I had always believed, on some deep, cellular level, that I was the problem. That my sensitivity was a flaw, my pain an exaggeration. That night, for the first time, a different thought began to take root. What if the problem wasn't my feelings, but their refusal to see them? The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was a simple cream-colored envelope, my name written in an elegant, familiar cursive on the front. The postmark was from a small coastal town in Oregon. It was from Mrs. Albright. It seemed my message had crossed in the mail with her own attempt to reach out, a synchronicity that felt like a quiet nod from the universe. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning light slanting across the page, and read the words that would change the course of my life. "Dear Cora," she wrote, "I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was your art teacher at Willow Creek High. I've thought of you often over the years. I am writing because there are things that a person carries, and my silence about you has been one of them. I saw the bruises, Cora. The one on your arm your junior year, the way you flinched when someone came up behind you too quickly. I filed a report with the school guidance counselor. I voiced my concerns. Your parents were called in. They were charming, persuasive. They spoke of how clumsy you were, how prone to dramatics. They suggested I was overstepping. I was young, untenured, and I was scared. I let it go. It is one of the deepest regrets of my professional life. I shouldn't have. I had to stop reading, my hand covering my mouth as a sob I hadn't realized I was holding finally broke free. She saw. It wasn't in my head. I wasn't dramatic. I was a child in pain, and at least one person had seen it. The letter continued. I kept my journals from that year. I wrote down my observations, the date of my report. I even have a copy of the form I filled out. I am telling you this now not to cause you more pain, but to offer you a piece of your own story you might not have. If you ever need someone to bear witness, to simply confirm that what you experienced was real, I am here. I am so sorry I wasn't stronger for you then. I sat with that letter for a long time, the paper growing soft in my hands. It was more than validation. It was a key. A key to a room in my own mind I had kept locked for decades, a room where the truth of my childhood was stored. Later that afternoon, I called her. When she answered, her voice was as kind and gentle as I remembered. "Cora," she said, after I introduced myself. "Oh, my dear. I'm so glad you called. We talked for over an hour." I told her everything, the Thanksgiving incident, the photo album, the spilled coffee. She listened without interruption, her silence not one of dismissal, but of deep, compassionate attention. When I finished, she said, her voice thick with emotion, "People like your parents, Cora, they build their entire world on a foundation of silence. Your silence, and the silence of everyone around them. The moment someone decides to speak, the whole structure becomes unstable." That night, a knock on my apartment door made me jump. It was sharp, impatient. It was my father. He stood on my doorstep, his face a thundercloud, his presence filling the small space with a heavy, suffocating energy. "I got a call from the high school," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're digging up things that should have stayed buried. You're talking to people." I didn't invite him in. I simply stood in the doorway, a silent guardian of my own hard-won peace. "You are going to embarrass this family," he hissed. "You are going to tarnish our name in that town. But let me be clear, Cora. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences. You were always a sensitive child, a burden. You still are. Don't think some old teacher can save you from that." He turned and left, the slam of his car door echoing in the quiet street. I stood there, not trembling with fear, but with a strange, clarifying calm. A burden. He hadn't called me his daughter. He hadn't said I was hurting the family. He said I was a burden. In that moment, I understood. They didn't love me. They loved the control they had over me. They loved my silence because it kept their world neat and tidy. I closed the door, leaned against it, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I walked back to my work table, to my small, sad archive of pain. I opened my laptop and created a new file, naming it the Willow Creek Project. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. A few days later, a phone call from a childhood friend, Maya, who still lived in Willow Creek, pierced through my newfound calm. Her voice was hesitant. "Cora, this is going to sound weird," she began, "but my sister is out of town for a few weeks for work, and your mom offered to watch her little girl, Sophie. She's 8. A cold dread washed over me. "What is it, Maya?" "Sophie told my mom something strange. She said your brother, Liam, got mad at her for spilling paint in the workshop. She said he grabbed her arm and told her to stop being a little drama queen, just like her Aunt Cora. Maya's voice dropped to a whisper. Cora, she had a fingerprint-shaped bruise on her arm. The world tilted. The same words. The same hands. A different child. A new generation. The pattern wasn't just in the past, it was repeating itself in the present. That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the city lights twinkling below. The choice before me was stark and clear. I could retreat back into my silence, protecting myself from the storm I knew would come, and in doing so, leave a little girl to navigate that same darkness alone. Or I could become the person I had so desperately needed when I was her age. I looked at the single, smiling photo of myself at 8 years old, and I knew. I could no longer be just the archivist of my own pain. I had to become the guardian of someone else's future. I baked a peach pie, my mother's favorite. My hands were steady as I crimped the crust, my movements calm and deliberate. When I arrived at the house in Willow Creek, the pie still warm in my hands, I was not the frightened daughter seeking approval. I was a woman on a mission, armed with a truth they could no longer deny. My father's condescending greeting, my mother's forced cheerfulness, it all washed over me. I sat at their dinner table, a quiet observer, playing the part of the dutiful daughter one last time. Then I set my fork down. I found some things, I said softly, my voice carrying in the quiet room. Photographs. Documents. A teacher who remembers. A childhood friend who is concerned. I looked from my mother's suddenly pale face to my father's hardening jaw. I am giving you an opportunity to tell the truth. To get help. You have until the end of the week. Is that a threat? My father growled. No, I said calmly. It's a boundary. And a choice. Your reputation or a child's safety. You can't have both anymore. Just then, little Sophie appeared in the doorway, a shy, quiet presence. My mother's head whipped around. Sophie, what have I told you about eavesdropping? She snapped, her voice sharp and cruel. You keep snooping and you'll end up sensitive and broken, just like her. Sophie flinched as if struck. And in that moment, in front of me, she had confirmed everything. I stood up, my napkin falling to the floor. I looked at my mother, at the ugly truth of her fear, and I felt not anger, but a profound, hollow pity. I walked out of that house, leaving the pie untouched on the counter. The confrontation I had dreaded for a lifetime was not a shouting match, but a quiet, chilling declaration of truth. The power had shifted. My silence was no longer theirs to command. The town council meeting was held in the historic Willow Creek Community Hall, a building my grandfather had helped restore. The air was thick with the scent of floor polish and civic duty. My parents were there, seated in the front row, poised to receive an award for their lifelong contribution to the community. When the council chair opened the floor for public comment, I stood. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice, when it came, was clear and steady. I didn't have a recording. I had my story. I walked to the podium and spoke of a pattern of behavior, of the difference between family privacy and a culture of silence that puts children at risk. I spoke not with anger, but with the quiet authority of someone who had lived the truth. Then a hand went up in the audience. I can corroborate that, a gentle voice said. Mrs. Albright stood, her presence a beacon of quiet courage. She spoke of the report she had filed years ago, of her regret. Then a man in the back, a former neighbor, stood and spoke of the shouting he and his wife had often heard. The room grew quiet, the atmosphere shifting from celebratory to deeply uncomfortable. My father, his face ashen with rage, stood and approached the podium, holding a piece of paper. This woman is unstable, he declared, his voice trembling with manufactured authority. She has a history of mental health issues. This is a copy of a psychiatric evaluation. Before I could even process the lie, another voice cut through the room. That is a forgery. Dr. Evans, our old family doctor, a man I hadn't seen in a decade, rose from his seat. I am the physician listed on that document. Cora Hale was seen in my office for physical injuries consistent with falls, not for psychological evaluation. That file has been altered. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. My father's bluff had been called, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in the public eye. I reached into my purse and pulled out the broken silver locket. I placed it gently on the podium. Some things I said, my voice soft but resonant, look broken. But they're just waiting for the right time to be mended. As the council meeting descended into chaos, I saw her. Sophie, standing by the door with Maya, her eyes wide. She wasn't crying. She was just watching. And for the first time, I think she was seeing that an adult could speak the truth and survive. A week later, I sat in a lawyer's office, the guardianship paperwork for Sophie spread across the table. The legal battle would be long, but the first steps had been taken. My parents, facing public disgrace and a formal investigation, had retreated into a silence of their own making. My sister, Clara, called me once. She was crying. "How could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "I didn't do this, Clara," I said gently. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. I don't know if our relationship will ever heal, but I know it can no longer be built on a foundation of lies." This afternoon, I took Sophie to a park by the Willamette River. The sun was warm on our faces. I gave her a small, velvet box. Inside was a silver locket, whole and new. "For your own stories," I told her. She looked up at me, her small hand closing around the locket. "Will we be okay?" she asked, her voice a small whisper. I squeezed her hand. "Yes," I said, the word feeling more true than anything I had ever said. "We will." Healing is not a destination. It is a journey, a quiet act of archival. It is the patient work of sorting through the wreckage of the past, keeping what is true, and gently letting go of what was never yours to carry. It is learning that your voice, no matter how quiet, has the power to change the story. And sometimes, the most inspiring act of all is simply to stand in the light and refuse, ever again, to be silenced.